We've got just a very distinguished panel today, and Gina asked me what I thought about, and the board, what we thought about having a water summit here. We said, absolutely, we need that. We know that's a critical infrastructure for the Bell County area. So let's get a few people to talk about it. I never imagined we'd get every one of the people that we need to talk about it. So this is great. Thank you, Gina, and the chamber, and all that you do for our community. And thank all of y'all for being here to listen to these folks, because this is a critical infrastructure issue for Bell County. And I'd like to introduce you to some of our speakers that are all of our speakers today. General Manager Ricky Garrett, Bell County Water Control and Improvement District. I'm going to start from the left and go down to the right. I think most of y'all know most of these folks. We've got our Texas Water Development Board Director, L'Oreal Stepney, who's with us today. Texas State Representative Brad Buckley. I didn't skip you on purpose, Pete. You're just not on the list. Let's start over here. Senator Pete Flores. Talk about his first here. We got Brad, and then we've got State Representative Hugh Shine, District 55 with us there on the end. Thank you, sir. Clearwater Underground Water Conservation District General Counsel, Attorney Cole Ruiz, Lloyd Goslick, Rochelle, and Townsend is with who he's with. And so we've got the big guns from Clearwater here that give us all the law on everything on our underground system. So we would like to give each of you 5 minutes or less. You know, take all 5 minutes, but just kind of introduce who you are and what you do and what your role in your particular capacity is for water in this area. Then when we get everybody introduced and kind of some of the high points that you'd like to introduce us on, we'll go through with some questions and give you all time to elaborate on some things. So Ricky, if you wouldn't mind starting.
I'm Ricky Garrett. I'm the General Manager of Bell County WCID 1. We serve wholesale water service to Belton, Nolanville, Harker Heights, Killeen, Coppers Cove, and to Fort Cavazos. About 300,000 people population served. I'll start. I'm doing an update on the Fort Cavazos ASR project. In 2019, Bell County partnered with Clearwater Underground Water Conservation District to look countywide at ASR potential. So they contacted several entities. There were several of us at the table, and under the guidance of Dirk Aaron and Clearwater, we looked at different potential sites. Interra Incorporated was hired as the expert, and Fort Cavazos was one of the participating entities. And in the feasibility work, that preliminary round, it was all desktop data. It was known information about the aquifer. And each entity that participated gave Interra some criteria at what would make their project feasible. For Fort Cavazos, they had two sets. So they wanted to be able to withdraw 2 million gallons a day for up to 5 months under a severe drought. And then their second set of criteria is they wanted to be able to withdraw 4 million gallons a day for 15 days in an emergency situation. And so that was the task for the hydrogeologist at Interra to look at and evaluate. At any rate, all the way through the desktop portion of the project, the boxes kept getting checked as if it's probably feasible for them. And so at the conclusion of the desktop, they wanted to keep going. So the next step is a pilot project where actually they asked us to help. They had some funding shortage. When they got the funding quote for their budget, fiscal year 22, by the time they were ready for the project, you'll remember what happened in the fall of 22. The market went crazy. So the actual cost ended up being almost triple what they had in their funds. And so they asked us, WCID 1, if we would help administer the project and help seek funding, and we did. My board approved $200,000. Fort Cavazos had $200,000, and the total need was about $600,000. And so with the county and Judge Blackburn's help, Harker Heights participated, Coppers Cove participated, Clearwater Underground Water District participated, and the Killeen Economic Development Corporation all participated to help make this project go. So it's truly a regional project in nature. So the project consists of a monitoring well and a pumping well. And so In Terra, you know, they spaced those a certain distance apart. They had the driller go down and put the casing down into the monitoring well, and then do the same for the pumping. So the idea is you stress the aquifer with some pumping rate, and you look at the monitoring well to determine what the impact is going to be in the surrounding areas. You also look at the depth of the aquifer. They were expecting from their desktop information in the 3D model that Clearwater has that the aquifer would be about 95 foot thick. Turns out it was only 60 foot thick, but it is very good material. It's got a high transmissivity. And so being only 60 foot thick, it means to inject water, it's going to disperse laterally a whole lot. Well, it's Fort Cavazos, so laterally is not an issue. They have a lot of acres. So we're proceeding, and we'll probably go to the next step. Preliminarily, no one quote me on this, but preliminarily, the 2 MGD criteria doesn't look like it's going to be an issue. The 4 MGD criteria, it might be more like 3.5. We don't know yet, but it's looking like they won't get quite 4 under that criteria, but it's why you go through and you do the pilot testing. So we're going to keep approaching this. We're getting a budget together for the next steps, and I'll close with that.
Thank you, Ricky. Ms. Dudley?
Good morning, everyone. Thank you for the invitation. Good morning. Yeah, there we go. There we go. Well, I'm L'Oreal Stepney. I'm with the Texas Water Development Board. It's a 3-member board. There's an attorney, a financial person, and the engineer. I serve in the engineering capacity for the board. But we vote on everything, right? Just quickly, the Texas Water Development Board was founded in 1957 after one, still probably the worst drought on record, although we've had some doozies in the last, decade or so. We all survived 2011. But after that point, the board was formed to look at securing a water future for Texas, and we still do that today. We have really 3 main functions. I call them 3 buckets. And they're full of water. So we have a science bucket, a planning bucket, and a financial bucket. So we're a water bank. Before I forget, my chief of staff, Carrie, raise your hand. We brought some show and tells. We bought a copy of our financial assistance programs, if anyone's interested, as well as we're going to have a water conference. So we'll have those brochures out there on the table. But just quickly talking about each piece of those 3 buckets, with respect to science, we do water sampling, we look at hydrometeorological data, we look at population projections, water projections, and many other things that really feed into working with local entities to put together our statewide water plan. The most recent plan was for 2022. It's a 5-year on a 5-year cycle that we update the state water plan. It's a bottom-up approach. The legislature decided to kind of reframe how we did water planning in Texas, and so it's a bottom-up approach. There are 16 regional groups, and certainly this area is represented in one of those. And at the end of the 5-year period, we compile that into the state water plan. I wanted to read a few statistics from the water plan just to give you guys an idea of, we all know water is important, but it's very important because it supports our communities and, of course, businesses, agriculture, all of those things. In the 2022 state water plan, population is anticipated to increase by 73% from 2020 to 2070, which means in Texas we're going to go from around 30 million to 51 million people, which is a lot. And the statewide water demands are projected to increase by 9%, from 17.7 million acre feet per year in 2020 to 19.2 million acre feet in 2070. The water plan identifies about 5,800 strategies, covering 7.7 million acre feet in 2070, and that cost is around $80 billion. And that's in 2018 dollars. So if we had a repeat of the drought of record, there's a potential shortage of 6.9 billion acre feet. So planning is very important for communities to shore up their water supply, and we're just happy to engage in that space. Couple other things on the planning front. The legislature asked us in the last 5 years to look at flood, because in Texas, we have really bad droughts, and then we have really bad floods, right? And so in August, the board is going to review the first ever state flood plan. And again, that's set up from a bottom-up approach as well, with regional flood planning groups that have contributed to the effort. So that's something else that the board is doing. And finally, with respect to the financial assistance programs, we have funding that's passed through from the federal level, and then we also have state-initiated funding to really focus on infrastructure for water, wastewater, stormwater, flood mitigation. If you have, in your communities, if you have wastewater, drinking water plants that need upgraded infrastructure, you know, there's financing programs for that as well as putting in new efforts like ASR or desalination, inland or seawater, just a whole range of things. And so our agency has financial assistance for those efforts. Of course, the need is this big and this amount of money, even though it's billions of dollars. So, but I want you to think of us as a resource for all of you. If you have questions, hopefully we can point you into the right space to help with those efforts. And the final thing I will say is, you know, in Texas we have such forward-thinking the legislature is such a forward-thinking entity, and the governor really in the last 10, 15, 20 years, there's been a major focus on water. And recently, in the last election in November, the voters approved $1 billion to create the Texas Water Fund that was originally passed by the legislature, signed by the governor. And so we're in the process, we just finished getting stakeholder input on that. We're in the process of deciding how we're going to implement that. And 25% of that must be used for new water supply. So again, another innovative approach from the Texas legislature, and we're here to implement that and to work with all of you. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Stephanie. Senator Flores.
Thank you, and thank you for working on implementing that what voters approved on that initiative. I serve on Ag, Rural Affairs, and Waters Committee in the Senate, and also on Senate Finance, which go hand in hand whenever you're dealing with any of these types of issues. So the money always has to follow the bills. You know, we were originally looking at $12 billion for that fund. Infrastructure in the state is old, and it needs improvement. So, but at the end of the day, it came out at $1 billion, and we're thankful for that, and it's a good step forward. Without water, you know, that's what guarantees the success of the economy and the quality of life. You know, about 1,400 people a day moving to our great state, because it's a great state and a good place to live, but without water, none of that is possible. So in dealing with water resources, you know, in the interim, we studied different items. The committee does under the leadership of Chairman Perry, Charles Perry, who's very forward-thinking. We're very blessed to have him as our chairman of our committee. And if you want any senator that knows water, it's Charles Perry. And it's an honor to serve with him. And you know, I've known him for a long time. But so we had an interim hearing in the last week, and it was about 4.5 hours long. We'll be having more of them as we're looking at where we want to concentrate our efforts and going into the next session. Of course, we had the manufacturers come in and say, well, you know, without looking at water, then that determines whether we're going to come to that community or not. Which is why these types of forums are important, why this types of planning is important, proactive planning, as well as reactive, which is old infrastructure. So we want to just look at that. We wanted to look at also alternate sources of water. So that means not only conserving the water resources that we already harvest, but we must find more. So how do you do that? You have to kind of think outside the box, if you will, or look at technologies that perhaps were financially prohibitive, and then say, well, how much are we willing to spend for water? Chairman Perry famously says that actually we're getting a heck of a deal on water right now, and we're actually getting away with paying a lot less than what it costs to get it out. Desalinization is one of the processes, and so you would think that desalinization only works on the coast with Gulf of Mexico, but it's also very effective in inland. with the large pools of reservoirs that we have of salt water. There's a number of saws in San Antonio, El Paso, and others that are very, very successful in desalination plants for that area. It's something that's very important that could be used in this area. Brackish groundwater, something that Bell County can look forward to developing these extra sources of water, and also work to preserve what we have already. And of course, something that we don't think about too much, but when you're talking about infrastructure as well, is protecting your control infrastructure from cyber attacks. And the cyber attacks have been occurring, and they're hitting small towns, and they're identified coming from hostile foreign governments that are probing our water systems and taking them over. So a few have had ransomware, but most of them are just a notification saying, Harker Heights, we can control your water system. And so that's something that's very important that we were talking about in the last hearing. And I think it was the city of Muleshoe that was the latest one that was hit. And you would think, what would the Russians want with Muleshoe? Beef. But all they sent to the city of Muleshoe was the little face, like a little skull and crossbones, said, "We can control you." So, and yes, it is scary, because you shut those off, or you just reduce the measures that for your systems, and your whole quality of water and delivery is compromised. And so it's another thing to look at. So we have to look at alternate sources of water. We have to look at pipelines from Louisiana, perhaps, desalinization, brackish water. So it's not something that we must do that. So the more we work together to improve our existing infrastructure and prepare proactively for the booming population that is the miracle of our Texas, the better off we're going to be. And I think with the talent that exists in this state, across our great state, both in our public and our private components of us, that we're going to be able to do that, because that's the way we Texans roll. And so I want to thank you all very much for your invitation to be here, and thank you all for your service. And it's great to serve with a delegation from Bell County representing you at the Capitol.
Thank you, Senator. Representative Buckley.
Thank you. First of all, good morning, everyone. Thanks for having me. It's always great to be in Harker Heights. Thank you, Harker Heights Chamber, for your leadership on this issue. I want to recognize Dr. Austin Ruiz, of course, a member of the Board of Directors for Brazos River Authority, and Horace Grace, who are here this morning, a former member of that board. Two gentlemen that forgot more about water than I'll ever know. So, I kind of want to speak to really, I think, the challenges for House District 54. And also how that sort of intersects with the entire county and the region. There's I think it was Abraham Lincoln, he said that things come to those who wait, but good things come to those who hustle. It's time to hustle on water. If you look at sort of the public sentiment on it, I always say they do the Long Bridge test. They drive across the Long Bridge over Stillhouse, and if there's a lot of water there, we're good. If there's not, we're bad. So now the good Lord has taken care of us, and with minimal damage, if you will, compared to 2010, when I lost a horse trailer and a tractor, when a creek they said would never get up did. The lakes are full. Things look good. And so that's a component. And if you talk to the Brazos River Authority, they'll talk about managing the basin. So when whatever we see locally in our lakes, that is sort of a stark reminder, but it's not really an accurate depiction of the state of water for our region or for the Brazos River Basin and the Brazos River Authority. So they have multiple projects that are ongoing. What I want to talk about right now is sort of the importance of groundwater. And so I think about that first because where I live, my neighbors, we're on groundwater. We're talking about a well behind your house that you pump water out of the Middle Trinity Aquifer. But also, we need to understand that there are many water supply corps, retailers and wholesalers in Bell County that have a blend of surface water and groundwater. And so, as we move forward, I think that the solutions are going to lie in all of that. ASR that Ricky talked about will be important in terms of gathering up water that would have made its way to the Gulf of Mexico, very likely, and storing it for future use. That would be a source of groundwater for us. But then again, the proper management of that groundwater, whether it be the Trinity Aquifer, the Edwards Aquifer. Years ago, we had efforts to sort of exempt parts of Bell County from certain restrictions on the Edwards Aquifer. Looking on that now and sort of the growth and everything, I think that's something I've heard stakeholders talking about is really, we need to pay close attention to the Edwards. The Edwards is a significant source of water for Salado water supply. It recharges immediately. It's a lot, it's easier to use that than the Trinity. But that's an important factor. We need to look at the impact of the Edwards Aquifer in Bell County, and of course we will continue to do so. In 2019, I guess naivete is what happens when you're a first-term legislator. I thought, talking to some local stakeholders, we went in and we were concerned about some of the groundwater activity in Williamson County. So I thought, well, let's file a little bill, we'll have a little study, we'll take a look at the Middle Trinity Aquifer. Well, that went over well. That bill was soundly defeated by the forces of Williamson County. But I'll let you know that their county commissioners court has now passed a resolution that's basically calling for what the bill did. I think that's the thing about water, is I think at some point the science will win. And if we do good science, that will win. And so the science has ruled the day there. And so now we'll begin to take a look of how we can better manage groundwater for our future, especially for those of us, significant parts of southwestern Bell County that really have the only source of water is going to be groundwater for now. You've got significant activity going on in East Bell County where they'll use groundwater and they'll pipe it and move it to the west for a very large development near Salado. So that is a solution, though it's capital intensive. And then you're going to see tremendous growth activity in southeast Bell County as Samsung develops, and the fact that cities don't annex like they used to or can't. And what you end up seeing is the fact that the county areas are going to have water. The county developments are going to have water concerns, and a lot of that will be groundwater driven. And so, my role here is to make sure that as we look out towards the future, that we understand the many areas that must be dealt with in terms of water, and groundwater is always a front of mind for me concerning the needs of House District 54. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Mr. Ruiz.
Good morning. My name is Cole Ruiz. I am here sitting in for my boss, who is the general manager of the Clearwater Underground Water Conservation District. I am the district's general counsel, and my firm is Lloyd Gosling, Rochelle and Townsend. My area of practice is primarily groundwater, though I do have a background in surface water. Before I became a lawyer, I was working for the San Antonio River Authority down in San Antonio. And the thing that sort of transcends surface water and groundwater is that we're really, when we're talking about water, we're talking about livelihood, quality of life, and our future. And so fortunately, and I say this pretty much everywhere I go, Clearwater happens to be one of my favorite clients because they do an excellent job of working with their partners throughout the county, whether that's Bell County or the various municipalities throughout the county, and even a lot of the landowners. And I say that because it requires a village to really protect the resource. And a little bit on that, the districts throughout the state were created for a couple of reasons. Primarily, though, to protect the quality and quantity of groundwater throughout the state where there are groundwater. And you'll notice if you look at a map, and I believe we have a map over here, not all of the groundwater, not all of the state is covered by a groundwater conservation district. Those districts are created locally to manage the resources locally. And that sort of goes in line with this tradition of kind of managing from the ground up. As the state grows, and I know this area is probably very familiar with the growth that's going on, particularly along the I-35 corridor. We're seeing a lot of folks coming in just looking for opportunities. There's a lot of opportunity, which is good for the state of Texas. Having affordable, reliable source of water is essential to continuing the economic development throughout the state, but also to protecting the future for our children and their children, and ultimately providing an affordable source of water long-term. Water, I think, is one of those things that we tend to take for granted. You turn the tap on, water comes out, and you don't see how it gets there. You don't see all of the sort of trials and hard work that goes into getting water to that tap. And it's part of the reason the legislature did what it did this past session, and the voters approved $1 billion to improve and enhance water infrastructure. The limitations and challenges of getting water at affordable and reliable, sustainable, in a sustainable way are really the natural geology. We can't control where growth happens. That's something that sort of organically it happens, and it happens because lots of times because there's a good source of water nearby. Oftentimes, there's plenty of water, but it's not exactly where we need it. And so it costs money to get water from point A to point B, and that is a cost that typically is borne by the taxpayers. And so we need to be very cognizant, not just of how we're spending those tax dollars, but how we're conserving the resource and using it efficiently. And so I've been very fortunate to work with Dirk Aaron and the Clearwater Board of Directors to help navigate those negotiations and sort of traversing the challenges that this area of the state is facing when it comes to water. And I say I'm fortunate because, like I mentioned before, there is such I would say a collaborative sort of environment in Bell County specifically in addressing those issues. I worked in other parts of the state where it's not so collaborative, and as I was reminded as I walked in this morning that water's whiskey's for drinking, water's for fighting. What does that mean for the state? Well, it means that we have a lot of work to do, and it means I have job security. So I thank y'all for that, but it makes it a lot easier whenever we're working together, and part of that is our events like this and getting information and public education out to folks and spreading the word and understanding and really increasing the water IQ of people throughout Texas.
Thank you, Mr. Ruiz. Representative Shine.
Thank you, Bobby, and thank you all for being here. This is obviously a very important topic and has been for a long time. I want to mention that Clay Roaming, a longtime engineer here in Central Texas, early on was a mentor for me on water issues. And when I was Mayor Pro Tem for the city of Temple, we made it a point to meet often and discuss the water issues. Temple was had a lot of foresight in what they did in protecting water resources. It's about supply and demand. And those two issues, those two words, drive the next things that I'm going to say. They drive public policy that is integrated horizontally and vertically among municipalities across the state of Texas. And people like Ricky and his organization have the responsibility of the implementation of the policy that the legislature develops. A lot of folks, we talk about water in the form of acre foot. And people just accept the fact. It's an acre foot. It's 326,000 gallons. Let's put it in a more visible perspective. Take a football field and put 1 foot of water in between the boundaries on the football field, and that's an acre foot. when you look at the surface water across the state, a lot of folks say, gosh, Toledo Bend is the largest lake in Texas. Well, Toledo Bend has 4.5, roughly, million acre feet of water. Well, the Carrizo-Wilcox aquifer, somewhere between 1.5 billion to 4 billion. So we need to look at this from a strategic perspective. So these are the major rate basins across the state of Texas. Remember, I started with supply and demand, okay? These are groundwater management areas. What's interesting here is these are conservation districts, and the white counties don't have one. And what is really interesting for us right here, because of where we are in this aquifer standpoint here, we have some neighbors that don't have a groundwater conservation district. And as Brad had mentioned, until recently, weren't really interested. Right. Okay? And we both experienced in the legislative process some pretty strong feelings about that in regards to any progress that we tried to make to help on the supply side. Because again, we're responsible for policy at the legislative level. And we give that policy to the Water Development Board and others, and then guys like Ricky have the responsibility of taking that policy and taking those programs that are put together by our water development for implementation purposes. So there are three aquifers that are the largest in the state of Texas. The Carrizo-Wilcox here, we have the Ogalla, and then we have the Edwards. And the Edwards has a couple of different levels. And folks, we are right, get my bearings here real quick. We are right here, okay? And here's Williamson County right here. And you can see where this flows. And one of the problems we've had, see where the tip of this dark blue, and you might not be able to see it, I'll leave the maps up here a little bit earlier. But as these aquifers are drained because of demand, it's like a bathtub. Suddenly these folks on this end, the water table declines. In fact, data that I have from Texas A&M on AgriLife on a study of the Carrizo-Wilcox over the last couple of decades, even the Carrizo-Wilcox is down 150 feet. So the supply-demand issue is a critical issue, and we need to understand strategically where the water is, who is helping manage that in these groundwater management areas and these conservation districts, where the aquifers are, and what we do to try to reach the demand. Well, Hutto, to the south of us, in 2006, took the initiative, and they went out, and they put in a pipeline. And they had enough water, not only to satisfy the city of Hutto, but they sold water. Until recently, when they've grown enough, they don't have the water to sell anymore, okay? You know, we've looked from a supply standpoint, a reservoir in Milam County, landowners' opposition there, not going to work. They looked at possibly doing something with Lake Georgetown, but development has encroached upon Lake Georgetown, so that's not going to happen. So we have a pipeline that goes from Stillhouse to Georgetown. Let's put this one in perspective as well. Stillhouse is 6 times the size of Georgetown. Lake Belton is 14 times the size of Lake Georgetown, okay? So when we start talking about the supply-demand issue, and we talk about the vertical and the horizontal integration and relationships of municipalities, we need to understand where the supply is and where those resources are, where those resources are, so that we can put together a strategic plan that works. And it's going to take cooperation among a lot of entities. One of the things that I advocate is that we do like some of, do like some of our neighbors have done. We need to collaborate. We need to have an aggregator, and we need to have collaboration among those who are part of that aggregation. For an example, county could take the lead. Municipalities like Harker Heights, Killeen, Nolanville, Temple, Belton, and the surrounding cities, Holland, Little River Academy, Troy, and it can go on, all become a part of that collaboration for the purpose of looking where we go and developing a strategic plan to make sure that we've got the water resources that we need. When people look, as Brad mentioned, when you go across the bridge, if you see a lot of water, yeah, thumbs up.
Yeah.
If you don't see any water, thumbs are down. Well, we got to get away from that perspective, okay? Because people are only focusing on surface water in that case, and they're not focusing on the big picture, which includes the groundwater and the aquifers that we're talking about here as well, okay? So you've got municipalities now, like Taylor, that spent the money, went out, bought land, put in wells, and built a pipeline. So they have now Samsung coming into their community. You had the same thing happen with Hutto. You've got people looking at the water in the aquifer up near Hearn and bringing a pipeline in. Those are the kinds of things strategically that we need to look at as a community when we have other communities doing the same thing and saying, hey, we can do that, rather than looking out at the lake and saying, well, we're 10 feet above levels. You know, we're okay now. We're not okay now, because we are on the eastern edge of what some call the desert, so to speak, when you look at that map and see where water resources are. Fortunately, we're close enough to the Carrizo-Wilcox that that's a source for us. But one problem, though, that we need to study and make sure of, and this is all part of the strategic plan. You've got the Post Oak Savanna that's impacting the Carrizo-Wilcox. And what is that all about? Well, that's where you have foliage that is invading Yopon and juniper, that's invading the recharge area for the Carrizo-Wilcox, and it's not recharging as quickly as it used to recharge. And when you look at the map and you know where the municipalities are that aquifer serves, if it's not recharging like it used to, as quickly as it did, or it's got some impediment toward recharging in a quick way, then suddenly you have a problem of everybody wanting to put a straw in the aquifer, finding out that the straw needs to be a lot longer, and it may not support what we really need to do. So bottom line is strategy, supply, demand, policy, and the integration horizontally and vertically of all the entities that are involved, and then the implementation. I think we do a great job on the implementation. We've done a good job in the management side from the state level. We got always room for improvement. Legislature is responsible for policy, but our local communities now need to seriously consider having an aggregator and collaboration with the communities in their county for the purpose of enhancing that supply so we can meet the demand. Thank you.
Thank you, Representative Shines. Okay, everybody got it figured out now? Absolutely. It's a lot to unpack. It's a lot of moving parts. We're all aware of that. We've been discussing a lot of these moving parts for a long time. Understanding that groundwater and surface water and even technology like ASR and things along those lines that we can use to prolong some of the surface water that we have are in existence and need to be part of this solution. Looking across the state, we're seeing by and large, at least what I'm aware of, in every case, that our groundwater is being depleted faster than it can be put back, even in Carrizo-Wilcox that you've alluded to, which at one point in time we thought had more water than anybody would ever need. You know, obviously a little naive to think that about any aquifer. But understanding that, if we're depleting these aquifers, shouldn't we be planning more surface water catches, lakes, reservoirs, in order to augment that water, knowing that, like Stephanie said earlier, that we are typically in periods of drought with short, huge flood times that kind of fill everything up, and then that water runs out to the coast. And understanding that it's difficult to legislatively get these reservoirs put into place, why would that not be a higher priority than it has appeared to have been in the past? Or maybe it is. Any one of you would like to answer that or parts of that, that'd be great. Yes, sir.
I'll take a stab at it. So how much yield a reservoir will allow is based on the watershed that serves it. So all of the major watersheds have reservoirs. It doesn't mean you can't add reservoirs, but you get diminishing returns on it. So doesn't mean we don't need reservoirs in some areas, but I don't think alone that's the answer. It's got to be desal, it's got to be ASR, it's got to be all of these things, but they all are expensive. I mean, I think the message that we all need to understand is that the cost of water is not going to stay something you just take for granted very much longer. It just can't. And we got to be innovative and have multiple answers to the shortage issue.
Sir, anyone else?
Yeah, okay. Yeah, there, I believe, Hugh, wasn't it 2019? I believe it's 2019 in that session when Houston Power and Light property was sort of brokered. There was a lawsuit, and there is a reservoir under development, Allen's Creek, I believe.
It's west of Houston.
West of Houston, yes, sir.
It's part of the BRA.
Yeah, and so, you know, that in itself, you know, but that's, I think all the state hurdles have been cleared. Last time I talked to BRA, and these gentlemen know better than I do, I think it may be 15 years of federal permitting before that really gets rolling. I think when we talk about that, I know one of the other things is that if you look at existing BRA, I'm not speaking for BRA, but I do visit with them a lot because they do know a lot about it. Lake Aquila, for instance, is a lake that could basically hold more water. It's a flood control lake, and that could create more water for the basin. I mean, so that's an option. That would probably take a federal, well, it would take federal legislation to do that. So that's kind of, that's sort of dealing with what you have, right? But I do think that, you know, you're really looking at you know, to have to do it all. You know, if we talk about surface water, groundwater, all these things, that's what makes this, and I think it speaks to what Hugh talked about when we talk about folks coming together, is that it takes folks that are surface water experts, and it takes groundwater experts, and all these technology folks as well, because without that, you can't solve it with one source. And again, regional thinking, Bell County, I believe, needs to drive their own train on this. If we wait for someone else to do it, we will end up with the glass half full, no pun intended, or half empty. Yeah.
What BRA is on the
Yeah.
management side, starting with Possum Kingdom, and this goes to the West Houston, Allen's Creek. The idea is that is not looked at as being a recreational facility like a lot of reservoirs are looked at. That is looked at as being more from a municipality standpoint of a retention pond, okay? Except it's a huge retention pond. It takes years to get those, which it has in this case. You got an issue that you're fighting with the federal government, because what if you got a snail darter down there, okay? Or you have golden cheek warblers, or, you know, all of these kind of things interfere with that. So the concept on the management side, this is not from the strategic 50,000 foot level, but is to manage that water so that you let this runoff that we've had recently fill up Allen's Creek. You allow Allen's Creek to be able to provide water resources until it goes dry before you start draining the bathtubs that are up in the river basin that flows through right here. And this is the Brazos River basin that's right here. And what that does then, it allows these lakes up through the basin to be able to maintain their levels and support the communities that are up here more effectively and efficiently. And that is a critical aspect of what Allen's Creek is going to do. In the meantime, we have contracts with BRA to support what's going on in Georgetown and Round Rock with the pipeline that comes out. By the way, the pipeline is only one way. It's water out, none comes back to Stillhouse. And they're contemplating with Bell House right now of a pipeline that goes from Lake Belton to Stillhouse. And that is under design right now in engineering. And if I'm not mistaken, that is probably going to be something we will be seeing a whole lot more and reading a whole lot more about within the next 5 years. It's called the Bell House Plan. And Horace, you may be fully, and Austin fully aware of that, because about 4 or 5 years ago, got into some deep discussions with BRA on that and the impact it would have, because from a perception standpoint, like driving across the bridge, like Brad said, if we got people that are taking our water and don't understand the strategic overall plan, everybody's going to be defensive and saying, we can't do that, okay? And I think Clearwater has taken the position of supporting the Bell House Plan, if I'm not mistaken. Is that right?
That's right.
Okay. Anyone else?
I was just going to say that with respect to reservoirs, the state water plan includes about, in 2070, 37% of our water supply will come from surface water sources, 15% from reuse, groundwater 12%, ASR and seawater desal, and then other forms of desal, of course, will make up the other percentages. And then there's conservation. Specifically with respect to reservoirs, I think several of the other panelists have talked about permitting, you know, the Corps permitting, and then also the TCEQ has to find water is available through the water rights permitting, which is kind of confusing for folks because you just see water going down the stream or the river, but you know there's no flags or permit numbers associated with that water that people can visibly see. So it's like, well, this looks like a lot of water, but they go through an appropriation process to see if water is available to actually construct the reservoir, and then the Corps has their pieces to it. So there's lots of moving pieces with respect to reservoirs, as well as there's permitting requirements for other solutions as well. But I do think it has to be a mix, right? And then we have to protect our existing resources and then look for the new water supplies. And then we have funding options for those.
So we've had several of you talk about regionality of water, and I agree. I think everybody in here recognizes now that this is a much bigger picture than just Harker Heights or just Killeen or just any one city. And we're seeing Georgetown getting a pipeline from Bridgeville Wilcox and controlling their destiny. Water Development Board, state funding otherwise, what things do you see, since we are a ground up kind of organization, what do you see to incentivize some of these smaller entities to get together and produce this regionality, other than supply and demand? Absolute necessity, I think, is what's driven us so far to kind of come together. But are there the money through Water Development Board or legislation through the House and Senate to incentivize these regionalities?
Well, I think at the Texas Water Development Board, what we're seeing is really the regional planning process is working, and that's where the communities with many different interests come together and they talk about their needs and how they can plan together. So we are seeing regional projects. There are still, though, communities, you know, they really want to kind of control their own destiny a lot of times, and so they feel more comfortable having their own sources of, or alternative sources of water and infrastructure. But we do see communities coming together and pooling together to have like a regional wastewater treatment plant or a regional water treatment plant. And of course, there's funding options for that.
Yeah, I can add something to that. You know, the question you asked basically is how can we incentivize more regional thought towards developing water resources. I would say that one success that I think we're seeing throughout the state is that $1 billion allocation to new supplies. And I say that because as a water attorney, I practice throughout the state of Texas, and I represent groundwater districts throughout the state. I represent cities throughout the state. I represent water utilities throughout the state. And in pockets throughout the state where there has historically been no discussion about collaboration on water projects, we're starting to see dialogue between municipalities in their local groundwater district and the county and the water utilities to try to figure out their water future, and that oftentimes is identifying innovative strategies to developing water, like ASR, like desalination. Historically, I think the discussion around those types of projects has been a fear of cost. Because of the cost of water and the cost of life, now it's become more economically feasible and necessary to start pursuing those types of projects and kind of change the way that we look at developing water projects throughout the state.
Bobby, we needed to start some of this stuff yesterday, and yesterday is not Monday, it's a long time yesterday. I'll give you one example. Bartlett, Texas. With Samsung going in Taylor and what's happening there, you're going to have growth move up Highway 95. The city council in Bartlett has attempted to receive state assistance, not successful in some cases, and this is over the past couple of years. They barely have a water resource for the folks that live there. Their wastewater treatment is marginal at best. And this is where, again, if we look at this from a strategic standpoint as a county, as a community, with the aggregator, with the leadership that's there, and bring all these folks together, and we have a plan. We've got Central Texas Water Supply that's a wholesale supplier. We've got WCID. If we have the right strategic plan, then these smaller communities that don't have the infrastructure or have aging infrastructure that can't support the growth that's going to take place, then suddenly you've got a collaborative effort that is going to be able to provide a supplier for those communities that are going to have the demand to locate and be in there. And that growth is going to come all the way up Highway 95, all the way up to Temple as well.
Yeah, we know that golden triangle all around us is going to require, necessitate funding, all kinds of infrastructure. Senator Flores, quickly, we're just about.
Yeah, well, thank you. Well, there's the old saying, necessity is the mother of invention. And that's kind of what when we're talking about collaborative efforts and folks that, I've represented, for example, Valverde County doesn't have a water district. There's some people that want a water district, that's mainly the city of Del Rio, and then you have the rural landowners that say, leave our water alone. And so, but yet now and then you have the Devil's River people, and they want things, they want to conserve the Devil's River. So, but when you have water levels across the board being depleted, so the necessity, then discussions, they've got more in common. As I said earlier, as I prefaced it, was without water, there's no life. But you also got to look at, again, preserving what you have, but also looking for alternative sources, and that's what policy in the legislature and the $1 billion is for, working with our Water Development Board to be able to coordinate that with our entities and our political entities across the state, and looking at different ways to do things. There's a county commissioner that testified last week from Cameron County, and just on a more efficient, looking at a more efficient way to capture, a runoff, found a significant amount of water that they were able to save that otherwise would have gone into the Laguna Madre. And so when you look at, just open your eyes a little bit and tilt your head a little different, you see things from a different perspective. And sometimes you have to look at those, who would ever think of catching the rainwater running off and going in the river, but you can. And especially if you're looking at a way that's cost effective and necessary, then you make up for this. That's an alternate source of water. It's not something that you're already trying to preserve that you already have, but more. So we have to go into this, deal like, with eyes wide open, and an open mind, and as long as we all understand that the commonality of water and how important that is across the board, that a lot of political walls and hurdles will be taken down.
All right, just to close us out here, I think necessity, we all recognize the necessity. I think we all recognize there's not enough money to fill the needs that we have now, but we've all got to work on it anyway. We've got some rule changes that might have seemed minor, but through our planning entities, feasibility is the new criteria now. And some of the things that municipalities and water districts had on their list of how we're going to get more in the future are now being judged as maybe infeasible, and that's not going to count for you anymore. You got to figure something else out, so that's going to increase that necessity. So as we see that for our region, I think we all need to recognize that when that lake is full, it looks good and we feel better about it. But that's not the solution. That lake is going to get dry again. And the more people that come here, the more development we have, the faster it's going to get dry. So we can't let our foot off the gas pedal, to Representative Shine's point yesterday. Today's going to be yesterday tomorrow. We've got to get this and keep the foot down on the gas pedal, 100 miles an hour, and get this figured out today, tomorrow, the next day, and keep working on that. That is probably our, from a county perspective, and what I'm hearing around the county, that's probably our biggest issue. We got some big issues around here in the state of Texas. We're growing very, very rapidly, and we enjoy that growth. We got to figure out how to manage it, and water is number one from where we stand here in the county, what we're looking at for our assets here, for any amount of growth that we have. So appreciate all y'all being here. Would y'all give a round of applause? Thank y'all all for being here, for getting this information. It's going to require all of you too. You're not complicit. We need everybody's hands in this. We need phone calls to our legislators, our leaders, our water motivators, and make sure that we all, and your friends.
Oh, I know. I'm right across.
Thank y'all for all coming out today. God bless you.
Good to see you, Cole. You too.